Israeli forces have rescued a hostage kidnapped by Hamas and held in Gaza for 10 months after American mediated talks to end the war and free all remaining hostages foundered at the weekend. Here's the reaction from Farhan Alkadi, brother of the released hostage, after his brother was freed. It was 326 days he was kept hostage.
It's difficult to explain how it feels. It's better than having a newborn. We thank God and we thank everyone and hope to see him healthy. We're very happy. Very happy.
Let's bring into the conversation Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who's Director General of the International Relations at the Histradut and former spokesperson for IDF, joining us now. How complex an operation will this have been, Lieutenant Colonel? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, of course, any operation in urban areas which has been extensively fortified, and indeed, in this case, subterranean tunnels, is a huge feat. It's a challenge that our military has been evolving around for many years, and more extensively, obviously, since the war began 11 months ago. So the complexity is, first of all, how to seek out the enemy. And I think that the forces were there actually based on intelligence that the Hamas terrorists were operating underground, holding hostages probably in that area. And that's why the complexity is, how do you go in a very tight situation and rescue hostages alive?
You mentioned rescue hostages alive. I believe the number still being held is around 100. Do we have any sense of how many of those are still alive?
108 is the number currently that the government knows about. I would say that the vast majority of those are still perceived to be alive, and that's a good thing. And that's why the negotiations continue to be underway in order to create the conditions of a deal. And I would add that there will only be a ceasefire and hostage release deal as long as there continues to be a military presence on the ground, because that creates the pressure and incentive of Hamas to negotiate. If there is no forces on the ground, Hamas will hold the hostages indefinitely.
How is fresh life to be breathed into these negotiations, would you say, Lieutenant Colonel?
So we've seen that, I think that the most important thing is that both sides seem to want a deal. That is ongoing, and that's why we see that they've not been broken off, despite the fact that last week Hamas said that they're stepping away. The working groups are operating in Doha. I think today they'll be heading out there in Qatar in order to try and create those conditions. I think Israeli society, and I would obviously say Palestinians in Gaza, definitely want this. We want the hostages home. We want them brought home now. And we need to see where can they and when can it be realized, despite the fact that there are obviously real concerns. We don't want Hamas to remain in control of the Gaza Strip. There needs to be a very, very clear de-escalation, disarmament, and de-radicalization process at the end of this war.
You mentioned society in Israel. We see photographs of demonstrations, not necessarily on a weekly basis, but they have been quite frequent. People dissatisfied with Benjamin Netanyahu and his approach. How fair is that in your view?
I think actually it has been every week. Every Saturday night, there are family members and supporters of them. And there is, of course, I think it is this yearning pain of, we need the hostages home. It happened on your shift. You are the prime minister. You have to be held accountable for the failure. You're responsible to bring them home. I think that's what we all expect, and that is exactly what the families are demanding. From the military's perspective, they have to create the conditions. From the government, they need to set the end game, and that is where things are moving today. I don't think necessarily that there's enough momentum in the family movement. But it's definitely a very strong message to the government and to the parliament in Israel, saying, bring back the hostages, create the deal, put the living forward, make sure that they come home, because that is your responsibility.
Lastly, you served as spokesperson for the IDF, standing away from it now. How would you characterize the way they have responded to events of October 7th and, of course, the ongoing months?
Well, of course, the initial failure of the military and being a lieutenant colonel in reserves, it's easy for me to judge and also to say where we should have been better. And I think that is definitely the responsibility and the process of accountability. And we've seen that the head of the military intelligence has stepped down. And I expect there to be more senior officers that will do so. Of course, that it also reflects on the government's failures. So I would say that the military is in a very deep process of investigating its failures. I think there needs to be a broader, and indeed, the head of military intelligence, Aaron Khalifa, General Aaron Khalifa, he said at the ceremony that there needs to be a government commission of inquiry in order to get to the bottom of the failures of the 7th of October. The conduct of the IDF throughout the course of this war has been, I think, front and center in international condemnation. I think Israel has been judged very, very poorly with regard to how militaries are expected to conduct combat in urban areas. And I would argue that the effectiveness of dismantling Hamas, that is a terrorist organization, a terrorist government, in effect, that has built for the last 17 years its capabilities, its army, and its plan of invasion, requires the military to operate very, very strategically, but also with a goal in mind that how the day after needs to be revealed, a day after where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace.
Grateful for your time. Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, Director General of International Relations at Histradut and former IDF